I'm so excited that we're finally here, number one.
Yes,
But
finally.
I know. So, okay, everybody, hi, welcome to the Power to the Flower podcast. My name is Nairobi, and I am the host, and this is my co-host for the day, Ryan Dominguez. So, Ryan is someone that is very, very dear to me. He's someone that I love and care for, but also someone I know is like an advocate and a champion in this cannabis industry as a whole. I first got to know Ryan through Mass Cultivated, and it's a nonprofit organization that gives back specifically to those who've been harmed by the war on drugs. In this whole policy space and the whole industry space, you see a lot of ways that we could really be helping people who've been impacted. And this nonprofit does that work by directly providing resources, whether it's, employment, right? Education resources, entrepreneurship, and then the last E. Expungement, the biggest and the baddest.
Yes. We got to clear those records.
Yeah, you got to clear the records, exactly. So, and that's one of the pieces that we're going to talk about today, because I think that having you on, we want to highlight, obviously, the good work that happens in the cannabis industry that we don't really talk about. So, first of all, welcome.
Thank you. I know it's we've been trying to do it for a minute, but sometimes life gets in the way. But
I know.
Here we are.
I know, but in between time, we've been definitely linking up, and I'm so excited for all the good things you have coming for you.
Yes, thank you.
But on a non-personal note, one of the things that I wanted to mention is obviously your bio, because you're someone that people see around in the cannabis industry. They know who you are, what you do. You've been appointed to many great positions, but your background, you're originally from San Francisco.
Yes.
Right.
Born and raised in San Francisco.
Born and raised in San Fran. So you got the cultural ties to weed from like the California,
yes.
the Cali vibes. You brought that good energy out here.
Exactly.
But you came out here for school, right?
Yeah, I came out here for school. So born and raised in San Francisco, but represent the whole Bay. I grew up in Oakland, grew up in Vallejo. So everything that I've done has just been really based in weed culture, to be honest with you. I just feel like, I didn't even think I was going to get into it on an advocacy tip or as work. But, growing up, everybody was smoking weed. Everybody was selling weed. So it was just kind of part of our culture, especially Bay Area 2000s. Everybody had to connect, or, somebody was going up to Mendocino to do some trimming. So, I got to see it all firsthand from a very young age.
That's so cool. So, I mean, obviously, you're from the Bay Area. I got to ask you what you think about Kendrick Lamar's album and all his recent Drake beef. But, I know that you're going to probably say good things, but I just had to plug that one.
Oh, yeah. I'm a Kendrick fan when it comes down to it. It's the West Coast kind of loyalty on that. But it was actually kind of cool because I got to see him coming up. I think it was back in 2011. One of my friends, everybody was kind of aspiring rapper back then. But one of them had opened up for him at this local venue in Oakland. So got to see him back in 2011, and now to see him perform at the Super Bowl is
it's
crazy. To see. Yeah.
It's crazy. It's such a beautiful way. You see so many things from your neighborhood developing. You're like, wow, in this short amount of time frame, look at all that has happened.
Oh, I know.
Especially with cannabis. But
yeah, shout out to Kendrick.
Yeah, I know. So you came from out there, you came to school here, and you went to Northeastern. And while you were at Northeastern, you made some really good friendships, and one of them was
some of my best.
One of them was someone who led to a really great role for you that I feel was the precipice that put your personal connections to weed to now into a workspace where you're doing some stuff in Mass Cultivated. So who was that key person for you?
Yes. Representative China Tyler.
That's
and
right.
I thought this question was going to come up. So I'm wearing a hat that she got me. Shout out to China. I appreciate it.
We love her.
Yes, we love her. But, she was somebody who was, born and raised in Roxbury, really knew some of the issues that they were going through. And I think Roxbury in itself is the definition of a community that had been impacted by the war on drugs. So, when I started with her, when she was first getting off the ground, we were really focused on criminal justice reform back then, and just trying to figure out ways that we could help people who were inside come back out and have successful lives. And that's been her whole MO. And I think cannabis just kind of intersected with that.
Yeah.
I think around that same time, 2017, 2018, they're coming out with the regulations and the laws for our legal cannabis program. And that's actually when I started reading about social equity and started, kind of educating myself on what some of the goals for the state were. And I knew that within those regulations, they had some requirements for businesses to give back to communities that had been impacted. But there was no real teeth behind that law. There was nothing that was requiring these businesses to do that outside of creating a positive impact plan. But, it's not tied to their renewal. They won't have their license revoked or anything like
if
that.
they don't complete
if they don't complete it. So I think that's when we started thinking about mass cultivated, and that really came out of China's office and was something that, she was able to put together some of her community resources like Roxbury Community College and Greater Boston Legal Services, and then connected to the communities and like the folks who are really doing the work for reentry, and just trying to educate people on this new kind of pathway for them. And that's how we started, just kind of building it from the ground up. Started as like a small pilot with RCC with like, I think 6 or 7 people.
Now, who's RCC?
RCC is Roxbury Community College. So, had to start it in the community where it's been impacted. So wanted to educate folks where they were coming from. And so, educated them on things like how to work at a dispensary, what metric was, the plant and the science behind it, and just trying to think about, how can we just equip people with all of the skills that they needed to actually get into this industry. And so, that education program grew into, hey, we need to do a lot more than just provide an education program to make sure people are successful. And so we started looking at things like legal services and clearing people's records, because that's like the biggest harm that came out of a lot of these things. The criminal records stop people from getting housing, from getting education opportunities, housing opportunities. So built that into the program, just, and that was community based. That's what we were hearing from folks in Roxbury.
Right.
And then from there, we just try to partner with the cannabis industry to do a lot of hiring. And even though we had a few bumps along the way, I think we created a really nice kind of ecosystem of folks who were employing our people. And you came into that and helped us to push that forward. And now we're kind of a statewide organization. So shout out to the team at Mass Cultivated who's keeping that going.
Absolutely. And to be clear, you were the executive director of that organization.
Yes.
And you talked about positive impact plan. So I want to go back to that for a second, but you also mentioned something about metric. And metric, just to clarify, it's like a system that does like the manifest and the tracking of specific, orders, and basically the internal system that connects it to regulatory compliance. So that's also like the CCC, but metric is itself a private company. But one of the things that you talked about in terms of making sure people know what that is the education piece. And through the education piece, we had those partnerships like with RCC, Roxbury Community College. I think at some point, I don't know if Middlesex was locked in.
Yep. So Middlesex is where we're running a lot of our programming out today. We also had partnerships with Holyoke Community College.
Right.
You helped to establish one at Northern Essex.
Yep.
And I think the community college system was really a good entry point for folks, just because it was in the local communities we were trying to serve. And then also it was just like one of those things that they didn't feel, that it was too far away from them. The folks that we had going into our program, they might not have finished high school.
Yeah.
They never have gotten a GED. So going into a community college program, something that they knew they saw in their backyards, was something that made people feel comfortable. And I think that was a really great place for us to really create this education program.
Absolutely. And what I love most about this is that, again, it targeted people who were either formerly incarcerated or had any particular connection to the war on drugs. And the ways that through the state we've measured it was through areas of disproportionate impact. And that's really just sort of like through this map created by the Cannabis Control Commission that sort of determines based on data points of different kinds. Some of those things were controversial, but all of those areas of disproportionate impact included areas in Boston, not necessarily like Beacon Hill per se, but more like Roxbury, right? So Boston, areas like, Haverhill, that disproportionate area. And just to kind of like show some kind of homage to the place that we're at right now, when Lawrence was recently added, and that was through some advocacy work and through some of the initiatives pushed by Commissioner Camargo. So, there's a lot to be said about like those areas of disproportionate impact and what the people who were impacted in those areas get benefits from. So we have the positive impact plans, and that is born through some of the regulatory stuff you talked about before that are required for businesses. But that positive impact plan also can include, like, let's say a cannabis business wants to donate, gee, I don't know, $5,000 to Mass Cultivate Ed, and those fees would cover the courses
Hmm.
that we would then be able to cover for, let's say, 30 students to pay for this program.
Yep.
So that's how we kept it free, right?
Yep, exactly. So all of the donations that we got from the cannabis industry were going right back to provide scholarships to the community colleges. And we knew that some of these folks didn't have like the laptops to do their work or the books that they needed. So we paid for the laptops and the books in addition to the scholarships.
Right.
And then I think we just ended up adding so many different things along the way because we realized that with the population that we were serving, you had to provide these wraparound supports just to get them to attend class and be successful. So,
Right.
thinking about things like transportation subsidies, like for people in Boston, we were getting them T passes. Sometimes we were getting folks like Uber rides. To get, yeah,
Childcare.
exactly. There was childcare responsibilities that people had. So, trying to support in any way we could. And I think that was really, kind of the power of Mass Cultivated was, not just doing the cannabis work, but also trying to support them in the other aspects of their lives. And so, I think the cannabis industry was really helpful in getting that off the ground and allowing us to, reach the folks that we needed to, but still was a challenge. Like you talked about, expanding the definition of areas of disproportionate impact to Lawrence. We had to do a lot of advocacy just to get people into the door. There was laws that were in place around suitability, and suitability was basically, going through line by line of somebody's query or their criminal background history. And there was like a very detailed list of things that you couldn't actually work in the cannabis industry if you had X charge. And for years, we were running into this barrier where people we were accepting into our program were not able to get their agent registration cards. So, thankfully, through some of the work that we did with Commissioner Camargo, as well as Commissioner Concepcion, we were able to change some of the suitability requirements. And I think, that comes from just dealing with it firsthand and then being able to share the stories of folks that were going through our program and
Yeah.
were reaching some of those barriers. So, I think it was very helpful for us to go through and experience it in the first hand and then be able to change it afterwards.
Absolutely. And I think that's the cool part about the program is that, like, you found ways, and this is what I always admired about your genius. Like, I know that there's, like, folks that we can, credit along the way, right? Like, I know that obviously we're trying to Tyler too, but in the sense of, like, you were seeing what worked and what's in it, and you were looking at, wait, what do we know that are additional supports that can be helpful? How do we then make it effective for this to sort of keep going as it proceeds, and then find a way to sustain even the resources we were offering, which is super dope because not only did you develop partnerships on the retail side, but you did some other stuff with nonprofits too. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, definitely. And just to touch on what you were just talking about, a lot of that didn't come from me directly. It came from our program participants and like some of the feedback that they were giving us. Shout out to one of our first fellows who were going through the program, Shaitan. He was able to go through and he was doing a retail specific job and then actually had some curiosity about getting into cultivation and working some of the corporate stuff. And that's how we built in some of these other opportunities and not just trying to place people into bud tender roles. In following classes, people were like, hey, I need some transportation subsidies. I need a laptop. And like all of these things that we realized we needed to provide to people was coming directly from the folks who were, dealing with it. And I think that's also how we learned about the different environments that people were going into in the cannabis industry. I think it was really eye-opening. You can't just place somebody who had been, incarcerated or been dealing with, the war on drugs and then place them into a dispensary system without the supports. Like you got to make sure that they have somebody who's their go-to, somebody who can provide some mentorship and training to them. And so I think all of that stuff got developed over time. And then to touch on the point about, how the nonprofit partnerships kind of came about, I think just naturally, a lot of the folks we were dealing with were also part of other programs to help them to get housing, to help them to, get their
Justice
children
for
back.
housing.
Yeah, exactly. Justice for housing or different organizations in the communities we were serving. And I think the biggest thing for us was like, why are we going to try to do this like by ourselves? Like this is work that we could all be doing together. And I think it was also an
Absolutely.
opportunity for us to, open up the doors for other organizations to also get some funding from the cannabis industry. And it wasn't one of these things where it was just like, hey, I gotta, keep all this like, cannabis donations for ourselves. It's like, let's spread that out. And I think that was really great because we could accept donations from the cannabis industry, and then we were able to pass those along to great organizations like GBLS, like Justice for Housing, and other organizations that, were helping our people. So,
Yeah.
whether it came to a toy drive at the end of the year or anything like that, or, one of their different events that they were having, we could support those. And I think that was all through, some of the support we were getting from the cannabis industry.
Yeah, and it definitely is such an imprint because those relationships we had from them, that still continues.
Oh yeah, yeah. Still working with them, still
Yeah.
getting referrals from
Yeah.
folks. I think as the cannabis industry has been struggling a little bit financially, we've had to look less at, I guess, cannabis donations to keep this going, and more like grant opportunities
Yep.
coming from local municipalities and the state. But
Foundations.
even with that, I think we're still able to get a good amount of folks through our program every year, provide them still the wraparound supports and like the things that they need. But I think at the same time, it's been a really great opportunity for other organizations to then tap into these resources in cannabis.
Absolutely. And I love that because some of the organizations that we mentioned, most of them are community orgs that provide just basic resources for this specific population. So a lot of our prison advocacy or returning home citizens, advocacy organizations, all of them really do play such a pivotal, important role to the up close and personal needs of a lot of these folks that we serviced here at Mass Cultivated. And that's what I loved so much about the program, because it created a sense of, it was already a community in and of itself, but it definitely created that within the cannabis industry for folks who were looking to go into entry level. And then now, there's some supports for entrepreneurial, opportunities, things like that. So shout out to the good work at Mass Cultivated.
Yes, yes.
You mentioned, though, in that little conversation there, something about the failing industry.
Oh, yes.
So before we get into all the tea, because we don't need to do all that, but definitely the conversation about the pivot from a nonprofit into working now with businesses directly. You already doing that with the partnerships, and you already kind of got that, through the legislature, through the advocacy there. But Ryan, now you were once the executive director for a nonprofit. Now you're the executive director for a trade association called the Massachusetts Cannabis Coalition.
Yes.
And we love the work you do there. But I have found that one of the things that I love most is that you've been able to unify on some issues that maybe at one point were really controversial.
Yeah, still are.
And still are, right? And so there's a fine line in kind of doing that. But then in the midst of all of that, you're also still serving on really important boards like the Cannabis Social Equity Trust Fund Board, and are you still on the
Cannabis Advisory Board as well?
Yeah. So the CAB, the Cannabis Advisory Board, and there's all these really unique positions that you're in the cannabis industry. But one of the ones that I love is the MCC, because you're up close and personal. You see how the businesses operate. Yeah. So tell us a little bit about some of those challenges, specifically policy wise. What's going on? What are some of the industry issues that are affecting business? And then in turn, how you see like how that could impact the workforce, like the folks we served at Mass Cultivated.
Yeah, definitely. And I think this is a nice little pivot point too on like how I made the transition from Mass Cultivated to the MCC. I think I started noticing a couple of years back that there were some alarming trends that were happening. Folks that we were placing into the industry were getting laid off because either one, the business that we placed them at was closing, or they were downsizing. And then obviously it was really disheartening, the fact that, they were kind of the last folks to get in the door, but were the first ones to get let go. And so, I started noticing a lot of these trends. And I think through some of my advocacy for Mass Cultivated, I also started meeting with some of these businesses. And so started learning more about some of their, issues, some of the pain points that the industry is facing, some of the projections that they had even going into these years. And I think it's something that we all saw kind of coming. I mean, it's kind of the natural progression of a new industry. Like, we had all of these businesses who opened up, and, the prices were high, and like they were able to really take advantage of that. And then obviously with more businesses coming online, more competition, you're going to start seeing a little bit more oversupply, oversaturation. And that's just kind of what happens. And I think the problem was one, we were the first in the East Coast to be able to start our cannabis program. So, everybody around us was actually coming into Massachusetts to get cannabis.
Yeah.
And now we're competing with the likes of New York, Rhode Island, Connecticut, Maine. It's pretty much everybody besides New Hampshire.
Right.
Like,
It's okay, New Hampshire.
it's
We
okay,
got
New
you.
Hampshire. Yeah, exactly. Just come to Massachusetts, and we got you here. But at the same time, like, I think these are all realities that we have to face, and so if we're having changing dynamics all around us, I think the mistake that we made as a state was we were not adapting our policies and regulations to the new changing environment, as well as the kind of new research and data that was out there. I think we created our laws back when we didn't have much information on cannabis. Maybe we were looking at what California or Colorado were doing and trying to kind of copy their language, but the science of it, we were kind of making that up on the fly. And when I talked to people who were, behind those closed doors, like creating these regulations, and they give me some of the, logic behind like why they created certain things, it's just like doesn't make any sense to me. So now that we have more information, it's time for us to really, make some of these changes that I think. So that's how I got into the MCC. We all kind of got around one issue topic that we all can agree upon in host community agreements. We all knew that the municipalities were kind of bleeding our businesses dry. I know that's a touchy subject as well, but we don't got to get into that.
No. But anyway.
Yeah.
But glad
anyways,
you did it, though.
But we were able to work on some of that. And what was great was it was a bunch of businesses that, normally would be pitted against each other. So we had some small businesses, some social equity businesses, and some larger businesses. And I thought it was great because we found this one issue topic we were all dealing with and we could work on together. And so I saw that as the vision for what was needed in the industry right now. I think that a lot of folks that I've seen and through my own personal experience with Mass Cultivated, we're always at each other in terms of like big versus small, equity versus non-equity, or like, certain license types versus other license types. And so, I think it's just, we're one industry, we're one ecosystem, we're all dependent on each other, like our single retailers need to get product from the growers, and the growers need product manufacturers need to develop these products, and everyone in between from the delivery operators. So what was my hope was that we would create this organization that would provide a platform for a lot of businesses to come together, have some of these hard conversations where maybe we can talk about the issues we're dealing with and come up with certain solutions. And I knew we weren't always going to agree. And we, to this day, we won't agree. And I don't think that we'll always agree on things. But I think the beauty of it all was once we get people the platform to like represent their license type, we started realizing that a lot of the issues that we're facing are industry wide. Yeah. And then some of the solutions that you're proposing is another solution that somebody else is proposing. Sometimes
maybe in a different way.
Exactly, might be in a different way, might have a different flavor to it, and so I think it's just been really great to just get all of those ideas into one kind of platform, and then also to be able to push forward now. Like, okay, we all agree that this is the way that we should move forward, and then to go to the legislature, to go to our regulators at the CCC as a unified voice and saying this is what we would like to see as the industry. And I think being that kind of strategic partner with them has been really helpful. And then also it's kind of got a life of its own now, where like some of the industry members and licensees have kind of started creating their own little working groups on certain issue topics that they really care about, and are leading that without me having to kind of be there, because they're the industry experts at the end of the day, right? Like they're the ones that are dealing with all of the compliance issues, the policy issues that are affecting them. And so I think it's just been really great to have everybody kind of having these conversations and working through it. And again, I think there are a number of issue topics that I think are, definitely fiery and get people kind of riled up, but it's good to have that kind of dialogue. And I think it's good for us to have that in both the MCC, but also in the public setting. And then for the legislature to hear that so that they understand both sides of the equation. And I guess, my role at the MCC is try to take the information that is out there and try to find some type of compromise and connect folks. And so on a policy regulatory level, that's what we focus on.
Which is super dope. And thank you for doing that.
Yeah.
I know it's important work because you're really kind of serving as a sort of like an equilibrium between different parts of the industry, different, you talked about how we're all kind of like related in some way, but it's because people kind of, you're a part of the supply chain. So in whatever part of business you're in, somebody got to supply something to somebody, you know what I mean?
Exactly.
And eventually the product goes directly to customers, so, or to the consumers. And that market then is what we determine, we, the market, the sort of the ones who go and consume, we're the ones that determine what we're willing to accept in terms of like our price points. And, if we see a competing price that is just like, yo, if I'm gonna go to the dispensary to, like, let's say Mellow, for example, and they got like $6 pre-rolls and it's just a simple thing that I want and I'm looking for, I may be like one of those easy to please consumers. And those are the ones you got to catch out for, because the easier to please consumers, I hate to say this, but if you don't got standards with your weed, you might go ahead and pay like literally the lowest point, and that's not good for business.
No.
However, there's different types of consumers. So there's more people who are like connoisseurs about their weed, and they wouldn't mind paying like $40 for an eighth at a dispensary, not including tax. Okay, just because they know the terpenes and they know the cultivator, they've seen how it's been, they know the process more, and they're just a little bit more pickier.
Yeah.
But not everybody's like that, and certainly not the average consumer. There's some people who in the industry that be in the industry that just be doing shit like that, but like for the most part, most people don't care.
Yeah, and that's kind of on us as the industry, though, right? Like, we got to do like the education to like teach people about like these other aspects of cannabis and the different products that differentiate themselves. Because I do think, even come California, never really heard about like, what was the tack of like this, or what was like the total THC. I think that people were just like kind of grown into like, kind of being educated a little bit more on things. And I think that's on us as the industry to then also educate kind of the mass consumer base. I think there's a lot of folks here in our industry, and we sometimes think that, if you're in the industry, like, you kind of know best, but there's a lot of folks out here who could be in the industry that don't know, and that's up to us to kind of educate them on that.
Absolutely. I know that some dispensaries are doing that. I mentioned Mellow, but they definitely have like, within their, products, they have something like the actual terps on it. And I know that that's kind of like a model that some of the dispensaries are trying to lean in towards, because it's more about the feeling that it creates versus the numbers that you see. And those numbers are like, THC percentage, or, like how high is this going to get me versus like what am I going to feel with the high? And some people don't understand that there's a legitimate science to that. And you don't have to have like the highest THC in order to get a good high.
Yeah.
So anyway, I digress. But this is a part of the industry that certain trends based on how consumers, relate to it affect how the entire ecosystem does it. But you also talked about regulatory stuff. And what I appreciate about a trade association like MCC, you're gathering the legislators and the regulators in the room. And the legislators are those who, serve in the state Senate and in the state House of Representatives, those who are on Beacon Hill doing work. And then obviously those other positions like the governor who has to like sign a bill or whatever into law. All of these people that we elect as Massachusetts, the Massachusetts electorate, those who are the voters here, we can, make those changes and whatever, do that, get participatory through the system with those electors or the legislators. But everybody plays a different role. And what trade associations do, they kind of bring the industry together with the legislators, as you mentioned. And now the conversations are being elevated as to what we can change collectively versus one single business kind of yelling at the rooftop. Although there's stuff to be said about that, too, because it don't matter how you do it. You're just advocating.
Yeah.
So how does that also play into, and, you can kind of pivot into some of the work that you do here, but how does this also pivot into the partnerships that you have with, like, let's say, other advocacy groups and, throughout not just Massachusetts, but maybe there's regional trade associations or national ones? How do you include the advocacy to elevate Massachusetts cannabis interests on the federal level?
Yeah. So I think there's a couple things to unpack there. I think, on the federal level, we have so much that we're focused on in Massachusetts at the moment that I haven't been able to put a lot of our resources yet into some of the federal advocacy. But what has been great is that there's a lot of organizations that are already out there, like the Minority Cannabis Business Association.
MCBA.
Yeah, there's NCIA. There's the U.S. Cannabis Council. I think they just merged with another one, which is a bigger trade organization. There's also Attach, which is like a cannabis and hemp trade organization. And what's been great is that they, as larger national organizations, have brought together a lot of state trade associations. And so I haven't had to recreate the wheel here in Massachusetts. I can kind of just learn from other trade associations in other states. And then also we can give our voice about what's happening here in Massachusetts to some of these organizations who can then disseminate some of that information down to the federal level. And I know they have a lot of like advocacy days that we're going to try to, get involved with this year and next year and, the years that are following. But I think a lot of the work that we're trying to do on the federal level is really just kind of starting with sharing our story and what we're dealing with in Massachusetts and trying to kind of either being a warning signal for other states or also to show like the things that we've done really well. And I think, being the first in the nation to create a social equity program, I think then other states took note of that and started creating their own, equity programs. And I think in a similar way, we should be learning from other states as they have new iterations and updating ours. It's kind of like a competition between states and trying
really
to,
is.
yeah, you know what I mean? And
everybody's like, I'm going to do it better.
Yeah, exactly.
And then you see
I
how
think,
they kind of fuck up.
And I mean, that's like built into our fabric in Massachusetts.
Yeah.
We think we're the best at a lot of different things. And so I think, we need to, keep that energy also with some of our regulations. And then
Absolutely.
I guess to touch on the point with some of the other advocacy organizations in Massachusetts, I think it's still kind of a work in progress. Obviously, we're kind of the new kids on the block who have just created. I don't know, it's been like a year, seems like 5, but
it seems like much longer.
Yeah, exactly.
So shout out to you because there's been a lot of work being done.
And
for sure in that 1 year.
My vision coming into this is like, this is not something where it has to be like the MCC is getting credit for any of the things or like it's MCC or else or is nothing else. And so what we've tried to do is like invite all the other trade organizations to the table to have these conversations with us. I know some of these are still kind of touchy subjects, and I know there's a lot of emotion that's built into it as we're all struggling here. And I think that the invitation's still on the table for all advocacy organizations to kind of take part in what we're doing at the MCC, at least to come and have a conversation, join our meetings, see what kind of conversations we're having and provide your viewpoint. Because, the conversations have always been in kind of silos. And I think that's why it's been hard for us to get any traction. It's just, it never seems like we're aligned or, we're working towards a similar goal as the industry. And I think that's what the trade association tries to do. And I know we're not always going to agree on stuff. I know that, we're not a perfect organization. Like, you can look at any kind of member one way or another and you can dock them for the type of organization they are or their practices or, like there's so many things around like accounts receivable, testing. So there's like so many things that like, you can point fingers at people at. And so I think, for us, it's really just like creating this platform for all the advocacy organizations to be a part of. What we've done is like started to show that, this is a valuable resource that people can be a part of. And, there's organizations like the Outdoor Growers Association. I think it's the SGCA, the Sun Growers Cannabis Alliance. And so they were able to take part in a few of our meetings. They realized that we had some crossover with testing priorities and they were able to join up and push forward on the testing priorities. And I think that is a similar example that we can set for other advocacy organizations. Like if you don't like one of the priorities that we're pushing, but you agree with another one, let's push on that together, because that's really what's going to get us like that change that's going to benefit you as well as like all the other organizations too.
It's giving crossover episode.
Yeah, exactly. I'm more than happy to have that.
Well, I'm glad, and honestly, good luck to you. Best wishes with that. I know that, obviously I'm a fan of the work that you do, but, I always am, because I know that you keep the community at the center. You definitely have had conversations with me offline. Just, I know that your personal importance and your MO about social equity being at the fore, with everything that you do. I mean, it's what we started off doing, and it's in your personal experience. So of course, that's something that's still a priority for you. I know that there's definitely room for social equity applicants or businesses that are looking to get into this organization. There's some of that as well. So one of those things that I wanted to mention, and we can sort of wrap up here, like the work that you do extends way beyond this stuff. I mean, you have your history in housing and like helping people with like evictions and things like that. And, you've dealt with the realm of constituent services. So if there's one thing that you could leave us with today, especially not just in the advocacy piece, but like we're going through some crazy ass times, okay? I'm concerned a little bit about what's happening on the federal level and how that affects the cannabis industry, because I'm seeing it in some Republican states and how people are being, losing even opportunities. But if there's one thing that you could leave us with in terms of how we choose to shape our world, or even how you with your advocacy skills has shaped the cannabis industry, what could you like provide for some hope, some advice, or something like to leave everybody with?
Yeah, I think that the main thing for me is just like share your truth in terms of like your experience, like whether it's in the cannabis industry. I think I meet, and this happened at NECAN a lot, where I was talking with folks who were, at the kind of entry level, middle management kind of level, who like was interested in the MCC and some of the work and advocacy that we were doing, but they felt like they didn't have a voice in like what we can do. And I think that even at that level, there's a lot that we can learn from the bud tenders, from the cultivation techs, from the sales managers. And so, I think that's an opportunity for all of the industry to kind of get involved. Don't think that it just has to be like, the upper echelons of your company that can like do some of this stuff. So, I think I'm trying to figure out ways that we can create more opportunities for individuals outside of whether it's like with your company or outside of your company, and you as a, just an industry stakeholder, because I think that's like a big thing. And so I would just say like, there's a lot that you are noticing from whatever level you're at in the industry, and to just like let that be known in whatever like kind of fashion you feel comfortable with, whether it's social media, whether it's like getting involved like with like a local kind of election, whether it's getting involved with some advocacy that we're doing in cannabis. I think those are all big points for people to like understand, and it really makes cannabis also like one of these things that is like a real kind of industry for folks, because that's what any other industry has. A trade association, it has folks who work in that industry that aren't the owners,
the Lobster Association.
Yeah, exactly, that are like involved in this. And so I would just like, try to plug that. And if I could do a little plug here,
please, this is your time to plug.
We're going to try to do something at Flower Expo that is like really tailored to folks who started, as a bud tender or cultivation tech, one of the entry level positions, and kind of work their way up now to, leading organizations, being executives. And so I think that'll be a nice way to like show folks like you can be on that stage too, to like share your truth a little bit about like your experience in the industry, because I think those are all viewpoints that will help us to shape better, policies, regulations, but also just like a better industry in terms of like what's the best practices for companies and trying to hold them accountable to that.
Absolutely. That's super dope. So anything else you guys got going on? Tell them what the Flower Expo is though before we move on.
Oh yeah, Flower Expo is a trade show. It's going to be in Northampton, June 4th and 5th, I believe. And and then our event, I believe, or our panel is going to be on June 5th. Going to try to highlight some really great folks in the industry who started as like a bud tender and like have now like worked their way up to different positions and how they got there, but also showing that like they're doing advocacy now too. So like that's all something that people can get a part of, and I think that's going to be a time we're going to try to launch for individuals to be part of the MCC too, just to
Are we going to see any of our former Mass Cultivated fellows?
Oh yes, there may be one or two of them who are up on that stage, so please come check us out if you're at Flower Expo.
Yeah, well, I'm excited for that one. And there has to be a way people can find you, both either on social media or just through email to connect with you on MCC stuff or anything on Mass Cultivated. How do people do that?
Yeah, so we have a website, masscannabiscoalition.org, and then you can find me at director@masscannabiscoalition.org if you want to reach out to me.
All right, y'all. And that's a wrap.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan.
Thank you.